Hi, welcome to the Gardening Me. I'm Margaret, and today I am going to be potting up my tomatoes. Now this year, just like with almost everything else, I am growing quite a lot of different varieties, 16 different varieties to be exact, but I'm only growing one plant per variety. I was just in one of those moods this year. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to be potting up these tomatoes, as well as I will be potting up some Dahlia seedlings. This is the first time I've grown dahlias from seed. I saw this beautiful cactus mix on the Baker Creek website and it intrigued me. Before I get to the potting up bit, I got my cheat sheet so that I can tell you about each of the different varieties, and I'm growing them across 4 different tomato categories. So those are, you have your slicers, or they're sometimes known as beefsteak tomatoes. You have your salad tomatoes. So if you have your beefsteak that's this big, your salad tomato would be about this big. Then you have your paste tomatoes, and those are usually oblong in shape, kind of oval, and they're generally a meatier sort of tomato because the main purpose of these tomatoes is to make sauces, so you don't want tomatoes that are very liquidy. And the last variety are cherry tomatoes, and we all know those, and there's all kinds of different ones. There's grape cherries and pear-shaped cherries and that kind of thing. So I'm excited to tell you all about the ones that I'm growing this year. So a lot of these I've grown before. There are a few, maybe 6 or so that I haven't. I will try anything once, right? I will try whatever tomato looks intriguing. However, I will only grow a tomato again if it tastes amazing. If it doesn't taste great, I can get those at the grocery store, right? For the ones that I've grown before, usually I will have a photo or something, tucked away, and I will put that on the screen as I'm talking about it. And if I don't have a photo of it, I will just put a picture up of the seed packet that I got. So let's start with the slicers. I am growing 6 slicers. And the very first one is probably the most famous slicer of them all, and that's Brandywine. And this is usually the slicer by which all other slicing beefsteak tomatoes are judged. Brandywine is an Amish heirloom tomato, and it was first introduced way back in 1885, so we're looking at almost 150 years ago. The photo I'm going to show of one of the Brandywines that I picked in the past, it was 600 grams, which is 1.25 pounds or something to that effect for one tomato. These guys can get big. So the trade-off though, and that's the case with most slicer beefsteak type tomatoes, is you may get really large tomatoes, but often you don't get a lot of tomatoes, right? So you're kind of trading off the quantity for the size. Brandywine tops for flavor, but the next one on my list, I don't know. I think for me, it tops Brandywine. Yeah, and that is Mennonite Orange. It is so delicious. It's a huge tomato, just like Brandywine. It has amazing flavor. It's very meaty, and it has hardly any seeds in it. It's from Pennsylvania originally, and just like Brandywine and the other slicers, you don't really get a whole lot on a plant. One year I only got 4 tomatoes, but you know what? I would rather have 4 outstandingly delicious tomatoes than 20 kind of, it's okay. Tastes a little bit better than the supermarket tomatoes, right? The next tomato is one where I'm growing it. I know I said already that flavor is number one, and absolutely it is. And this tomato has great flavor as well. and there's no question about that. But it is a looker. It is gorgeous. And so I'm thinking I would probably grow this tomato. Okay, I wouldn't grow it if it tasted horrible, but I would still grow it if it tasted okay, just because it's gorgeous. It's so beautiful. And that tomato is Costoluto Genovese. I've been growing this one for many years. I think it's one of the very first heirloom kind of tomatoes that I grew. It is not meaty per se, but it doesn't have a whole lot of seeds in it. It's a beautiful texture, so not grainy. The next tomato that I grew is Pink Love Apple. I mean, just for the name, you gotta love it. So this is a beautiful tomato as well. Unfortunately, I did try finding photos, couldn't find a photo of this guy. I grew it back in 2019 and I really liked it. I loved the flavor, I loved the texture, and I specifically made a note that this is definitely one that's going to be going on my grow it again list. The next one is a tomato called Pruden's Purple. This one also has huge fruits that apparently get up to about a pound, and it's a deep pink color. What intrigued me was that it said it was one of the earliest of the beefsteak tomatoes. And that's another thing with beefsteaks, is because they are huge tomatoes, it takes a while for them to actually develop to full size and then to fully ripen. So in my garden, usually I'm looking at the end of August until I get my very first beefsteak tomato off the vine. So those are the beefsteak tomatoes that I grow. Now on to the salad tomato, because I'm growing one of these guys. I like salad tomatoes, but when you have a limited amount of space, you have to be choosy about what you grow. And for me, salad tomatoes are sort of at the bottom of the list in terms of usefulness. I'm not really sure where the whole salad thing comes in. I guess because they're smaller than a beefsteak, but for me, I can just as easily cut up a beefsteak and throw it into a salad, or chop up a couple of cherries, or even depending on how big they are, throw them in whole into a salad as well. Okay, now, do not judge a book by its cover. Or in this case, don't judge a tomato by its name, because the name, quite frankly, is a little off-putting. But it's a great tomato, okay? You gotta trust me on this. It's a tomato you really should try. And it is called Bloody Butcher. One of the reasons I grow this tomato is because it is often the earliest tomato that fruits in my garden that I'm picking. And I'm talking even earlier, more often than not, than cherry tomatoes. So it is super early. The tomatoes are really delicious. They're very flavorful, but like I said, it's that earliness that gets me, because it's at that point in time where even if you've gotten a few cherry tomatoes, you're really itching for that one tomato you can put on a sandwich or that kind of thing. So I grow it every single year. It was one of the first, again, just like Brandywine, was one of the first that I grew, and I bought it that first year, and I think I may have gotten it from Tomatoville. And since then I have grown it and I've saved my own seed, and it's a absolute favorite. Now we're going to go on to the paste tomatoes. Generally speaking, when I'm choosing paste tomatoes, what I'm looking for are ones that are meaty, a good size, very flavorful, and they don't have a lot of seeds. This year I'm growing 5 paste tomatoes. The first one is one that I think I've mentioned several times in my other videos. I went to Portugal back in 2018. I picked up some seeds, and I picked up a packet of tomato seeds, and those seeds were called Chico III, as in Chico III, Roman numeral 3. And I had no idea what to expect, but they turned out to be really good, and they met all the criteria. They were pretty big. They weren't huge, but pretty big. They were flavorful. The insides were meaty, and they were actually one of the most productive varieties that I've grown. Like I said, it's not a small tomato, but it's smaller than the other ones that I'm growing. The other ones are pretty hefty. And so maybe that's why it's such a heavy producer. I don't think I've weighed it or anything like that to see if there's a comparison in terms of how much it produces by weight compared to the other ones, but quantity, it really pumps them out. So the next paste tomato I grow is called Speckled Roman. And again, it's a looker. It is a gorgeous paste tomato that's red with these kind of goldish type of stripes running down it. It's beautiful. Again, this is one I've grown for years. It was kind of on the rotation since the very beginning, and it has continued to be on the rotation. I think in the last 8 or 9 years, I may not have grown it one time or something like that. It's, I would say, a medium-sized paste tomato, not super large, not small. And just like most other tomato varieties, it tends to be bigger at the beginning of the harvest. So right when you start harvesting the tomatoes, they'll be quite big, but as the season progresses, they kind of get a little bit smaller. The next one that I'm growing is actually a test, sort of. I actually bought these seeds by mistake because I thought that I had run out of Speckled Roman. And so I bought a packet of striped Roman seeds. I figured, why not give them a go as well, because they are not necessarily the same. I think they might be the same, but I'm not certain. So I thought, you know what, I'll grow both and see if there's a difference between Speckled Roman and striped Roman. Because technically the Speckled Roman, when I look at it, it looks striped to me. So the next variety is Opalka. Opalka is it's a long, kind of skinny-ish paste tomato, but it's quite long. Like it'll grow to about 5 inches long, about like that. It's quite long and delicious, and it produces really well. And the last paste tomato that I'm growing this year is another that's been on the lineup for many years, and that's Amos Coli. And Amos Coli is probably the largest paste tomato that I grow. I mean, this guy can get huge. It's kind of a little bit more rounded and blocky, and it's a big paste tomato. I've harvested some Amos Coli tomatoes that are almost a half a pound, like 200 and some odd grams for one tomato. That's a big paste tomato. The last group of tomatoes that I'm growing are cherry tomatoes. And I have picked, if I do say so myself, some really interesting varieties. The first one, it's called Blush. And this is a tomato that actually I saw growing in a friend's garden last year. And it looked really intriguing. And actually I had seen this tomato around. So when I saw it, I knew exactly what it was. She grabbed a few of them and gave them to me. I took a bite and I'm like, I have to have this tomato in my garden next year. So this tomato was firm, it had a beautiful texture, not grainy, and it was really delicious. So I took a couple of those tomatoes, saved the seeds, and that's what I'm growing this year. It is an open pollinated variety, so fingers crossed that I get what I'm expecting to get. The next cherry tomato I'm growing is called Apple Yellow, and this one is an All-American Selections winner. I've been growing it for a couple of years. It's flavorful, it's a tiny bit tart, but not too tart. It's really nice and firm. I'm not sure if they look like apples. They actually almost look like itty bitty peppers, like bell peppers. Like it's more that kind of shape to me anyhow. The next cherry tomato I'm growing is one that I know might be controversial because for me, this one overtook Sun Gold. That's right. I no longer grow Sun Gold, and instead I grow this tomato. And this tomato is Mexico Midget. It is so sweet, so delicious. And the one thing that I found gave it that little bit of an edge above Sun Gold was the skin. Because I found that the skin on Sun Gold was sometimes a little bit tough, and I wasn't really a fan of that aspect. I loved the flavor, and it wasn't all the time tough, and maybe it was a little bit of lack of water or something to that effect, I don't know. But Mexico Midget, I found, has all the flavor, maybe even a little bit more, but the skin is beautifully tender. So amazing flavor and tender skin. I mean, what else can I say on that? Now, the next tomato variety I'm growing is one that is new to me and not new to me at the same time. And this one is called Riesentraube. Now, I just actually wrote a blog post. If you're not aware, I do have a blog. I've linked it down in the description box below. And I just wrote a blog post all about Riesentraube. And this tomato has been in my stash for 5 years. And I got it from a particular seed house, a small seed house, I'm going to say that, but I'm not going to name names. And you could kind of tell as soon as you open the packet that something was off, because the tomatoes, the seeds were all lumped together like they hadn't been properly washed and rinsed or something. I'm not really sure. But as soon as I saw that, I kind of went, I don't know. But I sowed them, and I have been sowing those seeds 4, 5, 6 at a time over the last few years, and I didn't get any germination from them. And this isn't a variety that you just see commonly, so I really wanted to try this variety. And this year I thought, you know what, I've been trying this for 5 years now, I've never gotten germination, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just dump that whole packet in there and see what happens. And if I get not even a single seedling, well, at least I tried, right? So that's what I did, and I did end up getting a bunch of seedlings. And I ended up potting up. This is an heirloom variety. I think it's an heirloom variety. At the very least, it's open pollinated. It isn't a hybrid. So if I do end up liking them, I will be able to save seeds and actually prepare them properly. So I ended up, these are the guys, they're actually a little late. I ended up doing 4 of these. I'm gonna put 1 in my tomato beds, because I'm doing 2 tomato beds, 8 plants per bed. So this was one of the ones that's going in there, but the extra 3 I'm just gonna throw in a bed, just because I wanna make certain that I actually get to taste Riesentraube after 5 years. And the last but not least is a tiny little tomato called Gold Rush Currant, and this one is only about 1/4 of an inch big. It's very sweet and full of flavor. One of the interesting things about this one that I really enjoyed was that the tomatoes held really well to the stem after they were ripe. So in most cases, the tomatoes will ripen, they'll, on the stem, and as soon as they ripen, they start getting a little soft, and then they eventually fall off. This variety, the tomatoes themselves stayed nice and firm and held onto that stem for days after they were fully ripe, which I really appreciate, because sometimes you really aren't able to get out there every single day and pick whatever's ripe at the moment. So those are all of the varieties I'm growing. Here they all are, plus a row of dahlias. I started these about 3 weeks ago. They still have at least another 2 weeks until they get into the ground. And tomatoes, when you pot them up, it is amazing how quickly they grow. They will look like this big when I pot them up today, because I will be burying the stem. After 2 weeks of growing roots, you'll see they will get pretty big. That's one of the things that I had to learn over the years, was not to sow my seeds too early, because then I was left with very leggy plants. I mean, it's not a disaster, because when you plant them outside, you can still bury that stem, but still, you don't really want to have them stagnate in the containers and get root bound and things like that. So why don't I move this aside, and I'm just going to start potting these up, and then we'll talk about the dahlias. Okay, so basic potting up procedure. You have your container. I'm using these large Tim Hortons coffee cups because why not? We will often go out for a coffee, and what I'll do is I'll just keep the cup, I rinse it out. And the reason why I really like this size instead of doing a large pot is because typically pots are wider and shallower. This is quite long. I would say this is in the neighborhood of 6 inches or so long, but it's not very wide. Like, it's probably 3 inches wide at the top. And what I want is something that has a lot of depth so that I can plant my tomato seedling as deeply as possible and get as much stem in here as possible so that the roots can develop along that stem and make for a much healthier and larger plant. Yeah, I just noticed the soil was a little dry, so I just got some water and I'm mixing it up here. First things first, drainage holes. These cups actually are very easy to get drainage holes in. I just use a screwdriver and go like that. Oof, not the best sound. But what actually I usually do is I'll get a bunch of them like this, and then I will go down, oof, hands are all dirty, like that. And I just make a bunch of drainage holes like this. Got our drainage holes, now we're going to get our seedling. So here's our seedling, and this one is Pruden's Purple. Set the label aside. I remove the cotyledons. I had a little bit of an issue earlier this year with my grow lights, and a lot of things have suffered because of it, unfortunately. I've since got that fixed. But, well, those roots are actually perfect. They're not root bound at all. They're just the perfect size. So I have that. What I'm going to do is put just a little bit of soil, not too much, maybe, I don't know, an inch or so of soil on the bottom, and then just plop this down like this. And now I just add soil all around, all the way up. Generally what I do, or like to do anyway, is pot these up when the tomatoes have 2 sets of true leaves. This guy's a little stretched, I think, because of, like I said, I had that issue with the lights. There we go. 1 done. Don't forget to put the label back in. 1 done. And what? 16 plus 3 to go. Oh, see what I mean? Almost forgot to put the label back in that one. When I water as well, I'll probably have to add more soil because it will sink down a bit. I am firming it down, but I'm not pressing it down hard. And so this is the last one that we're doing. And this one is the Chico III. So I don't know if I mentioned, but I'm using Pro Mix vegetable and herb potting mix. I believe it's an organic potting mix as well. I dampened it so that it's just slightly damp. I didn't worry actually too much about making it too moist because I am going to be watering all the seedlings in with diluted fertilizer. That's something actually I read about just recently. Someone was saying how watering in your transplants with a little bit of fertilizer helps with transplant shock. I'd never really done that in the past, so I thought I would give it a try this year. I think I did that for the peppers as well. So that's why I dampened it, but I didn't wet it as much as I normally would if I was sowing seeds or something like that. I've just switched up my soil here. This is just regular potting mix that I have here, also just the general Pro Mix potting mix. And I'm going to be potting up my Dahlia seedlings. Now this is the packet, and it's a Cactus Flowered mix. It looks gorgeous. I really, really love the cactus type flowers. I've never grown these before, but they seem to be getting big enough. Like I looked, I don't know if you can see here, that the roots are coming out the bottom of the pot. And so it's going to be at least 2 or 3 weeks until I can get these into the ground. I don't want them to get pot bound, and they have grown really quickly. It's only been about 3.5 weeks, and they're pretty sizable. And I think I could have even potted them up even a week ago. And for these, I'm using actually larger pots just because of how quickly they grew. I'm using these containers here, and these are about 5 inches deep and 3-4 inches wide. Oh, and by the way, you don't have to use coffee cups. I don't think I mentioned. Obviously, you can use whatever containers you have. Taller and narrower saves space. For me, gives you the ability to plant the seedlings a lot deeper without using a huge container that takes up a lot more space and that also uses up a lot more potting mix. But if I run out of these, my next option is usually I go to the solo cups to pot these up. I'm new at this. Like I said, never grew these before, so I'm just going to do the same thing I do when I pot up everything. You don't want to pull it by the stem. I basically just squeeze the container and it usually just pops right out. And yeah, the roots are looking really, really good. Not root bound, but definitely ready to pot up. And I'm going to just put it in here. There's a little seedling. I think this must have been another seed that I planted. Okay, there you go. That's actually the perfect depth. So it's going to be about a 1/2 inch below the top of the container. The fun thing about these is that you don't know what color you're going to get until it flowers. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And the other fun thing about growing dahlias from seed is that the seed grown dahlias will develop tubers. They'll be relatively small that first year, but they will form. So at the end of the season, you can basically pick whichever ones you like the best, all of them, some of them, one of them, and save the tubers just like you do with regular dahlias, and then plant them again next year. And the following year, of course, those tubers will grow bigger and multiply. I have no idea how these are going to do this year, how well they're going to flower, how big they're going to get. They are supposed to be 3 feet tall. But like I said, growing from seed, maybe they're not going to get that tall this first year. Maybe next year when I plant the tubers, they'll be that tall. But maybe they will. I guess we'll see. I have 4 of these, so I'm just going to carry on and pot up all 4. The other thing with these is, unlike the tomatoes, I am not burying the stem at all. I'm potting them up so that they are essentially at the same level as they were before, which generally speaking, I would say is a good rule of thumb, unless you know otherwise, because some plants, if you do bury them too deeply, they will tend to rot and not survive. I don't know whether you can bury these or not. Maybe you can, but I'm just going at the depth that they're in, which is the safe bet. There we go. And that is it. Last one. And that is that, all potted up. It always feels so good when you do these things. I can't wait to see these guys grow. It's going to be amazing. I can't wait to taste that first tomato. It's going to be even more amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today, and we will see you next time. But you know what? Hold on a sec. I'm just going to show you a little something that's happening in the raised bed area right now. Spring is finally here. Oh my goodness, can't wait for these guys to come up. Oh, it's so exciting. It's really nice and firm. I love tomatoes that are firm. Did I mention that already? I saw this beautiful cactus mix on the Baker Creek website,